All right, welcome back. So now let's get into the understanding of the left and right hand limits. So really it's the same thing as we looked at, or the notation is the same from the general limit. The main difference here is rather than the limit being defined from the left and from the right, we just are going to look at a one side. So one side either being from the left or from the right, which we call right hand notation or left hand notation. And to differentiate between these two, we just kind of use these little symbols here. The positive means right hand notation, and here's going to be left hand notation. So what I want to do is just kind of go through the same examples that we looked at. We'll call all these functions f of x. And again, just kind of show you how things are working here from this case. So in this case, it doesn't really matter if I do the limit from the left or from the right. I want you guys to see that they're both approaching 2, right? So if I said the limit as x approaches 0 from the left of my function f of x, you could see that value is going to equal 2, right? Because again, we're approaching 2 from the left as well as from the right, okay? However, some things, again, it doesn't really matter even if this function is undefined or not, like at that value, right? So if I look at the limit as x approaches 0 from the right, again, where I'm approaching just from the right-hand side, again, you can see that I'm approaching the value of 2. Right? So of f of x, you could say that this value is going to equal, again, 2. Now, the times where things get sometimes confusing for students is when we do have that jump discontinuity. Okay? Because remember, the general limit does not exist. But let's say I had one where I'm going to have a function that maybe looks something like this. Okay, so I'm going to do each left side limit. Now, hopefully you recognize that in this case, the general limit does not exist because from the left, I'm approaching 3, and from the right, I'm approaching 1. But as my value is approaching 0 from the left of f of x, I could say that, yeah, it's approaching 3, right? From the left, it's approaching the number 3. But if I use the same function, but now say, well, what is it approaching from the right of that function? I can say it's approaching 1. So the one-sided limits can be defined because you're only looking at one side that you're actually approaching. The same thing works here when we're looking at when we have a function that has an endpoint. So for instance, if I had something like this, right? So as I'm approaching 0 from the left, we could say, hey, that's defined, right? So the limit as x approaches 0 from the left of my function f(x), that's going to equal 2. However, from the right, since there's nothing there from the right, we can say that that is not going to be approaching. That's not going to be defined. So f(x), that does not exist. Okay. Now, the same idea that we talked about with the general limit when we're looking at asymptotes is going to be the same thing here. If we have a asymptote that the graph is approaching, typically the graph the limit does not exist. However, if we want to be more direct and detailed with it, then we can go ahead and use infinity or negative infinity. So it doesn't really matter. They don't both have to approach the same value here. We can just say it's either infinity or negative infinity. So again, if we look at another example here, let's say this one's going from there and this one's going to the right. So we could say the limit as x approaches infinity from the right of my function f of x, you could say now that one going to infinity, right? So as it's approaching 0 from the right. And a lot of times what we look at is the hand trick, right? So as you're looking at this, you put up your hand and say from the left, like you carry your hand from the left or carry your hand from the right. Okay, so there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is the notes that you need for the left and right hand limits. Go ahead and get started in the next section for your examples, and I'll see you over there in the next video. Cheers.